phones, Babylons can't crack the
What it do, YouTube? B Kelly back again with another banger. Today's video, I'm making my Sun Belt college football predictions for the 2020-21 season. And first, I'm going to talk about the West Division in the Sun Belt. With my first place spot in the West, I have Louisiana. Now I'm predicting a 9-3 record for Louisiana. I have them beating McNeese, losing to Wyoming, beating Georgia State, Georgia Southern, losing to Appalachian State, beating Coastal Carolina, New Mexico State, Texas State, Arkansas State, Southern Alabama, then losing at Mizzou, then beating Louisiana Monroe. Now let's talk about the best case scenario. Best case scenario in my eyes would be a 10-2 season without the loss to Wyoming, of course, to be 10-2 to beat Wyoming so they can be 10-2. And the worst case scenario, in my eyes, I would have to say would be an 8-4 season, but I'm pretty confident with 9-3. With my second place spot, I have Arkansas State. Now I'm predicting them to go 6-6. I have them losing to Memphis, beating Howard, losing to Michigan and Tulsa, then beating Coastal Carolina and Georgia State, then losing to Appalachian State and Troy and Louisiana, then winning out, beating Louisiana Monroe, Texas State, and South Alabama. Now, let's talk about the best case scenario in my eyes. Best case scenario in my eyes would be an 8-4 season. They can definitely beat Tulsa, and I think they could definitely compete with Louisiana, because Arkansas State's not a bad team at all. Now, worst case scenario would probably have to be a 5-7 record, but I don't think they're going to go 5-7. The only team I could see them losing to possibly on this list would probably be Louisiana Monroe, like out of the teams I had them already beating. With my third place spot, I have Louisiana Monroe. Now for Louisiana Monroe, I'm predicting a 4-8 record. I have them beating Cal Poly and Texas State in their first two games, but then I have them losing to Georgia, Georgia Southern, Liberty, and Troy. Then I have them beating South Alabama. Then I have them losing to Appalachian State, then beating Georgia State, then losing to Arkansas State, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Now let's talk about the best case scenario for them on this list in my eyes. Now best case scenario in my eyes is a 6-6 season if they can beat Georgia Southern, who lost some firepower, and Liberty, who also lost their best receiver and quarterback. Now worst case scenario is honestly probably a 3-9 record or 2-10 record. They could lose to Georgia State, and they could lose to Texas State. Texas State is a team that could be on the rise just slightly. Not like a winning season, but do better than they did last year. With my fourth place spot, I have Texas State. Now I'm predicting a 3-9 record for Texas State this season. I have them losing to SMU, beating UTSA, losing to Louisiana Monroe, and then Ohio. Then I have them beating New Mexico State, losing to Troy, then beating South Alabama, then losing to Louisiana, Appalachian State, Georgia Southern, Arkansas State, and Coastal Carolina. Now let's talk about the best case scenario for this team that I see. Now I predicted I'm at 3-9 record, but I will say the best case scenario in my eyes would be a 4-8 season. I say that because I can see them beating Coastal Carolina this year, but I can also see them beating Louisiana Monroe, which would make them 5-7. But will they do that? Probably not. That's the highest I think they can go, is a 5-7 record. Now, worst case scenario would be, honestly, probably 2-10. They could honestly even win one game, but I'm going to say 2-10 because I think the UTSA game they should win, but they could also lose. With my last place spot in the West Division of the Sun Belt, I have South Alabama. Now for South Alabama, I'm predicting a 1-11 record. And the only win I have them winning is versus Grambling in Week 2. I have them losing to Southern Mississippi, Florida, UAB, Troy, Texas State, Louisiana Monroe, Georgia Southern, Coastal Carolina, Louisiana, Georgia State, and Arkansas State. Now worst case scenario obviously is 0-12. Now best case scenario in my eyes is a 3-9 season if they can beat Georgia State and Texas State. Even 4-8 is possible if they can beat Coastal Carolina, but I don't see them beating all three of those teams right now. Now on to the East Division. With my first place spot in the East Division of the Sun Belt, I have Appalachian State, and they're my favorite to win the whole Sun Belt Conference yet again. I'm predicting an 11-1 record. I have them beating Morgan State, Wake Forest, losing to Wisconsin, beating UMass, beating Louisiana, beating Georgia Southern, beating Arkansas State, Louisiana Monroe, Texas State, Georgia State, Coastal Carolina, and Troy. Now, best case scenario is 11-1 in my eyes. I don't see them beating Wisconsin at all, especially in Madison. Of course, Appalachian State is good at upsetting people. I just don't see them upsetting Wisconsin this year. Now, worst case scenario in my eyes is a 9-3 season. Actually, check that, 8-4. If they lose to Troy and Louisiana and Wisconsin and Wake Forest, they'd be 8-4, and that is my worst case scenario for this team. But I'm going to stick with my prediction of 11-1. With my second place spot, I have Troy. Now I'm predicting a 9-3 record for Troy. I have them beating Pine Bluff, UMass, then losing to NC State, beating South Alabama, then beating Texas State, then Louisiana Monroe, and Georgia State, and then beating Arkansas State, and Georgia Southern, and Coastal Carolina, but then I have them losing out in the last 2 games of the season, losing to Tennessee and Appalachian State. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. Now, that is the best case scenario in my eyes, is a 9-3 record for Troy this season. Last year, they had a lot of up and downs. I mean, they went 5-7 last year, and they're a team that usually goes to a bowl game. But worst case scenario for this team that I honestly see, I would have to say it's a 6-6 record. Yeah, it's not much better than 5-7, but I think they can make a bowl game this year, and I'm pretty confident that they will. With my third place spot, I have Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern's been a pretty good football team these past couple seasons, and they've had some pretty good coaching, but they did lose some firepower going into this upcoming season. I'm predicting a 6-6 record, and I have them losing to Boise State, beating Campbell, losing to Florida Atlantic and Louisiana, then beating Louisiana Monroe, then losing to Appalachian State, then beating Coastal Carolina and South Alabama, then losing to Troy, then beating Texas State, then losing at Ole Miss, then beating Georgia State in their final game to be 6-6. Now, best case scenario that I see with Georgia Southern would honestly have to be a 8-4 record. I can see them beating Florida Atlantic, and I can see them beating Troy. So I think best case scenario is 8-4, and the worst case scenario that I see, honestly, it would have to be a 5-7 record, because I don't see them losing to Georgia State and Louisiana Monroe, so I'm going to stick with a prediction of 5-7 as worst case scenario. With my fourth place spot, I have Georgia State. Now, Georgia State did go 6-7 last year and made a bowl appearance, and they lost, and they did even upset Tennessee last season. But this year, I'm predicting a 4-8 record. I have them beating Murray State in their first game, then losing to Alabama and then Louisiana. Then I have them beating Charlotte, then losing to East Carolina and Arkansas State and Troy, then beating Coastal Carolina, and then losing to Louisiana Monroe, then losing to Appalachian State, then beating South Alabama, and then losing to Georgia Southern. Now, best case scenario in my eyes, honestly, it would probably have to be a 6-6 record. I don't see them being anything better than 6-6, so I say 6-6 is the best they can be in my eyes. Worst case scenario in my eyes, though, is a 3-9 record. I don't see them, well, they could go 2-10 with a loss to Charlotte and Coastal Carolina, but I think 3-9 is more realistic, even though 2-10 is definitely possible. With my last place spot in the East Division of the Sun Belt Conference, I have Coastal Carolina, and I'm predicting a 3-9 record. I have them losing to South Carolina and Eastern Michigan, then beating Duquesne, then losing to Kansas, Arkansas State, Louisiana, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, then finally beating South Alabama to end the losing streak. Then I have them losing to Troy and Appalachian State in the next 2 games, and then beating Texas State in their final game of the season. Now, worst case scenario in my eyes is a 2-10 season if they do not end up beating Texas State. Now, best case scenario in my eyes would probably have to be a 4-8 season or 5-7 season. If they could get lucky, beat Georgia State and maybe even Eastern Michigan, since Eastern Michigan did lose some starters that were pretty quality, like their quarterback. Now, I don't think they're going to go 5-7, but that's my best case scenario for them is 5-7. I don't see them making a bowl game this year. I'm going to stick with my prediction of 3-9. And if you guys like the video, remember to smash that like button, turn on the post notifications, and subscribe for more videos. B. Kelly out.